The first light of dawn crept over the ridges, spilling gold across the valley where silence was broken only by the sound of a woman dragging a log through the mud. Her dress was torn, her hands were raw, and her breath came in ragged bursts. Every pull was a fight against the earth itself, every step a memory of what she'd lost. Behind her stood the half-finished cabin, her dream, her burden, her promise to no one but herself. Evelyn Carter wasn't born for softness. Life had stripped her of vanity long before she learned what it meant to be beautiful. The mountains didn't care for pretty. They cared for strength, grit, and the will to rise again when the cold bit hardest. Still, there were nights when she'd catch her reflection in the river and wonder if the woman staring back was even human anymore, or just another ghost among the pines. The crunch of hooves broke her thoughts. A shadow crossed the morning light, and a tall figure on horseback came into view, dusted with trail dirt, hat tilted low, eyes unreadable beneath the brim. He reined his horse to a stop at the edge of her clearing, silent, watching her struggle with the log. She didn't look up. She didn't want pity. "You'll break your back if you keep pulling like that," the man said, his voice low, roughened by travel and wind. "I already did," she muttered, not pausing her work. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching against gravel. "Then why keep going?" She paused finally, wiping sweat from her brow. Her eyes met his, dark, sharp, the kind that could cut or heal. "Because no one else will finish it," she said, nodding toward the cabin. "And I don't like leaving things half done." He studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod, the kind that carried quiet respect. "Name's Colton Hayes," he said simply. "You alone out here? Always?" He didn't answer that, just walked over, picked up the other end of the log, and together they moved it closer to the cabin frame. For the first time in months, Evelyn didn't feel the mountain's silence pressing against her chest. When the log settled, she turned toward him, voice soft, almost breaking. "I'm not pretty," she whispered. Colton looked at her, eyes steady, voice even softer. "That's fine," he said. "I need honest, not fancy." And in that small moment, beneath a sky bruised with dawn, something inside her shifted, not hope exactly, but the fragile beginning of it. Evelyn didn't know what to say after that. The world seemed to hush. Even the wind through the pines held its breath. She wasn't used to kindness. Out here, kindness had teeth. It came with a price, or worse, a lie. Yet the way Colton said it, steady, simple, unbothered, felt like truth. No poetry, no pity, just truth. She turned away and picked up her gloves, pretending to focus on the next beam. "You talk too much," she said, though her voice was trembling more than she wanted it to. Colton chuckled, a quiet, low sound like gravel rolling in a creek bed. "Don't worry, I ain't here to talk." He set to work beside her without another word. The rhythm of it was strange, comforting even. The thud of logs, the scrape of rope, the soft grunts as they lifted and rolled each heavy piece into place. The day warmed slowly, sunlight spilling across the clearing, catching in the dust that rose from the ground. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt something other than exhaustion. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was a kind of peace, the kind you find when someone finally helps carry what you were never meant to lift alone. As the sun climbed higher, they took a break by the cabin wall. Evelyn's hands shook as she poured water from a tin cup. Her palms were blistered, her knuckles red. Colton noticed, but said nothing. He just leaned against a post, wiping sweat from his brow. "You building this for someone?" he asked finally. She hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon. "My husband didn't make it through the winter." Colton nodded slowly, not offering empty sympathy. He understood loss. It was written in the way he stood, in the quiet between his words. "Then you're finishing it for him," he said. "For me," she corrected. "For once, just for me." He gave a small, knowing smile. "That's the best reason there is." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and rain. The clouds were gathering again, dark, heavy, full of promise and threat. Evelyn felt the ache in her back, the sting of her wounds, but she didn't stop. Colton stayed beside her, steady as the mountain itself. When the first drops began to fall, she looked at him and said quietly, "You don't owe me your help." He smiled faintly beneath his hat. "I don't owe anyone anything, but sometimes it feels right to stay." Rain began to pour, washing the dirt from her face, from the wood, from the ground itself. Evelyn laughed, raw and tired and real, the sound of someone remembering what life feels like. And Colton, standing there in the rain beside her, tipped his hat low and said, "Guess honesty looks pretty good on you after all." The storm raged, but neither of them moved, because for the first time, the mountain didn't feel empty, it felt alive. The storm rolled in fast, the kind that swallowed the sky whole. Thunder cracked like rifle fire, shaking the half-built cabin. Rain beat against the roof planks, seeping through the gaps, turning the ground into a river of mud. Evelyn tried to cover the firewood with an old tarp, but the wind ripped it clean out of her hands and sent it spinning into the dark. She cursed it under her breath, hair plastered to her face, soaked to the bone. Colton caught the edge of a log before it tumbled down the slope. "Get inside," he shouted over the wind. "I can't," she yelled back. "The frame will fall if we don't brace it." Without another word, he ran to the side wall and pushed his shoulder against it, muscles straining. Lightning flashed, turning his silhouette into a bronze statue against the storm. Evelyn grabbed another beam and jammed it into place. The two of them fighting the mountain together, one heartbeat at a time. The wind howled, tearing at her dress, at the roof, at everything she'd built with her bare hands. Then, with a cracking roar, the ridge behind them split in a small landslide, sending rocks tumbling toward the cabin. Evelyn froze, eyes wide, until Colton lunged forward, grabbed her arm, and pulled her clear. They hit the ground hard, mud splattering their faces. For a moment neither moved, breathing heavy, the rain masking everything but the sound of survival. When the worst of it passed, they crawled beneath the rough shelter of the half-built porch. Evelyn sat there shivering, her fingers trembling as she wiped mud from her face. "Why'd you do that?" she whispered. Colton looked at her, rainwater dripping from his hat brim. "Didn't think about it, just did." She studied him, this stranger who'd walked out of the wild like he belonged to it. His clothes were soaked, his jaw tight, but his eyes were calm. The kind of calm you only earn after losing more than you can say. "I'm used to standing alone," she said quietly. He smiled, just enough to soften the storm around them. "Maybe it's time you stopped." She looked down, twisting the ring that still clung to her finger. "He used to say I wasn't strong enough," she murmured. "Said I was too plain for this life." Colton tilted his head. "Then he never saw what I just did." Evelyn's breath caught. No one had ever looked at her that way, not with hunger, not with pity, but with simple, unwavering respect. The kind that made her feel seen, not for what she lacked, but for what she'd fought to keep. As the thunder faded into a low growl across the ridge, she leaned her head against the cabin wall, exhausted but alive. The rain slowed to a whisper, and the mountains breathed again. Colton stood, offered her his hand, and said, "Come on, let's see what's left to fix." She took it without thinking, and for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel broken. She felt found. Night fell heavy and cold after the storm. The rain had passed, leaving behind a quiet that felt too wide, too clean. The cabin still stood, crooked but proud, its rough walls dripping with silver moonlight. Evelyn gathered what what she could salvage, and struck a match with shaking fingers. The small flame flared, flickered, then caught. Soon, warmth filled the space, chasing the damp from their bones. Colton sat across from her, hat off, staring into the fire as if it held answers he'd been chasing for years. His face looked older in the glow, lines carved deep by dust, loss, and miles. Evelyn studied him in silence, wondering what kind of man rode alone into the wild and stayed there by choice. "You don't talk much," she said softly. He smirked without looking up. "Talkin' never fixed much. And fightin' does?" He chuckled at that, low and quiet. "Sometimes. But buildin'," he nodded toward the cabin. "That's what lasts." Evelyn stared into the fire. "It doesn't feel like it'll last. Not out here." "Then you make it last," he said. "You keep fixing it till it does." The words sank deep. She'd been holding herself together for so long. She'd forgotten what it felt like to believe in anything. The silence stretched, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken things. Finally, she whispered, "I used to care about being pretty, about ribbons and mirrors and smiles that made folks look twice. Then the world went and took all that away." Colton's eyes lifted from the fire, meeting hers through the flicker. "World didn't take nothin'," he said. "It just showed you what mattered." Her throat tightened. "And what's that?" He leaned forward, voice low, steady as the crackling wood. "Truth, heart, the kind of strength that don't wash off when the rain comes." Evelyn felt her chest ache, not from pain, but from the strange warmth his words stirred. No one had ever said it like that. No one had ever looked at her and seen more than the dirt and the scars. The fire popped between them, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Outside, the mountains stood silent again, the stars breaking through torn clouds. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn smiled, small, tired, but real. Colton noticed. "There," he said quietly. "That's what pretty looks like." She shook her head, but her eyes glistened. "You've got a funny way of seeing things, Cowboy." He smiled faintly. "It's the only way that keeps a man alive out here." The night deepened. The wind hummed through the pine, soft as a lullaby. Evelyn leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed, feeling something she hadn't in years, safe. And when the fire began to fade, Colton rose, laid another log on the embers, and said without turning, "Tomorrow, we build again." She nodded, a whisper escaping her lips. Tomorrow. Outside, dawn waited beyond the ridge, patient, quiet, full of promise.